The Texas sun is a merciless god, and in 1878 it baked the dust of Fort Griffin into a fine red powder that settled on everything and on everyone. They called this land the edge of the world. Beyond it lay the Comanche, a territory ruled not by law or government, but by the moon, the seasons, and the sharp end of a lance. They told Eleanor Vance to stay out. They warned her that the land kept its secrets and demanded blood for everyone it gave up. But she was hunting for a ghost, a flower said to undo death itself, and she wouldn't be turned back by warnings. She wasn't the only one. He too was hunting for ghosts of his own, and their two paths, born of obsession, were about to collide in a land that tolerated neither. The town of Fort Griffin hunkered under the vast bleached blue Texas sky, a scab of clapboard and grit clinging to the banks of the clear fork of the Brazos River. It was a place of last chances and final mistakes. To the east lay the tamed, troubled heart of Texas. To the west, the Llano Estacado, the staked plains, a seemingly endless ocean of grass that belonged to the Comanche. Everyone knew it. The treaty lines were invisible, but they were felt in the bones, a prickle of unease that kept most folks on the right side of the river. Eleanor Vance was not most folks. She stood before the wide, warped counter of the Fort Griffin General Store, her gaze fixed on the map pinned to the wall behind the proprietor. It was a crude thing, its rivers meandering like drunken snakes, and its mountains looking like swodged thumbprints. The western expanse was simply labeled Comancheria. Do not enter. The words were stark, a command written in thick, angry charcoal. Looking to get lost, ma'am. The store owner, a man whose face was a road map of wrinkles named Henderson, polished a glass with a rag that had seen better decades. Eleanor turned her head, her green eyes so out of place in this brown world narrowing slightly. I'm looking for information, Mr. Henderson, about a plant. They call it the ghost orchid. Some say Cypripedium spectabile, but that's the eastern variety. This one is different. It's said to grow only in the canyons of the high plains. Henderson snorted a dry, dusty sound. The only thing that grows in those canyons is trouble. That's Comanche land. The Quahadi Band. Parker's people. They don't take kindly to trespassers, especially not after the army pushed them onto the reservation. Some of them never went. They're still out there. Hard men. Kills the enemy. They call their war chief. He ain't a man for negotiating. I'm a botanist, not a negotiator. Eleanor stated, her voice calm, but with an underpinning of steel that Henderson wasn't used to hearing from a woman not holding a shotgun. Her traveling dress, though practical, was of a finer cut than the local calico, and she carried herself with an educated posture that set her apart as much as her quest. Botany won't stop a lance, he muttered, setting the glass down. What's so important about this flower? Before she could answer, the batwing doors of the store swung open, casting a long, sharp silhouette against the afternoon glare. The man who stepped inside seemed to bring the wilderness with him. He was tall and lean, dressed in scuffed leather and denim, faded by the sun to the color of the sky. A holstered Colt Peacemaker hung low on his hip, tied down in the manner of a man who used it often. His face was all angles and shadows, with eyes the color of faded slate that missed nothing. He moved with a quiet, predatory grace that made Henderson instinctively straighten up. Caleb, the store owner, said, his tone shifting from dismissive to respectful. Need supplies. The man. Caleb nodded his gaze, sweeping the store before it landed on Eleanor. It was a brief, assessing glance, but in that second, she felt as though he had catalogued every detail about her, from the determination in her jaw to the fine tremor of exhaustion in her hands. He walked to the counter, placing a few empty cartridge casings on the wood. 44 40s. He said, his voice a low baritone, like rocks grinding in a riverbed. And coffee. The strong kind. As Henderson moved to fill the order, Caleb's gaze drifted to the map. He looked at the stark warning, and then back at Eleanor. A flicker of something amusement, or maybe pity, crossed his face. "Don't listen to the sign," he asked. It wasn't a question so much as an observation. "Signs are for those who are easily frightened," Eleanor replied coolly. He gave a humorless smile. "Sometimes they're for those who want to stay alive. The Comanche don't draw lines on maps. They draw them in blood." He picked up one of his spent casings, rolling it between his thumb and forefinger. "You go out there alone, you won't be coming back, and nobody will go looking for you." "I've been told," she said, her chin lifting in defiance, "by Sheriff Brody, by the quartermaster at the fort, and now by you. My reasons are my own, and they are worth the risk." The truth was, her reasons were a pyre of grief and guilt burning in her chest. Her younger brother Thomas had been taken by a wasting fever 2 years prior. The doctors in Philadelphia had given up their modern medicine useless, but in her mother's old journals, filled with botanical drawings and folklore, was a pressed, ghostly white flower. An entry described it as the ghost orchid of the plains, a Comanche remedy for ailments of the lung and spirit, a plant that could call a soul back from the edge. It was a fool's hope, a myth born of desperation, but it was all she had left. She would not let Thomas's memory be a closed book. She would find the flower, prove its existence, and give his death and her life some semblance of meaning. Caleb seemed to read the desperation she tried so hard to hide. He looked from her determined face to her hands, which despite her poise were clutching her reticule so tightly her knuckles were white. "Whatever you're looking for," he said, his voice softening just a fraction, "it can wait. A war party was spotted 2 days ago riding north of the Salt Fork. They hit a buffalo hunter's camp, left no survivors. That's not a rumor. I saw the camp myself." A cold knot tightened in Eleanor's stomach, but she forced it down. "I appreciate the warning, Mr. Jackson. Caleb Jackson, Mr. Jackson. But my course is set." He simply nodded, as if her stubbornness was a foregone conclusion. He paid for his coffee and cartridges, gave her one last long look, and then was gone. The doors swinging shut behind him, leaving only the scent of dust and gunpowder in his wake. Later that day, as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in violent hues of orange and purple, Eleanor found herself at the livery, paying an exorbitant price for a sturdy mare and pack mule. The stable hand, a boy no older than 16, shook his head as he took her money. "Sheriff Brody ain't gonna like this, ma'am. He told everyone not to sell you a horse for a trip west." "Sheriff Brody is not my keeper," Eleanor said, checking the cinch on the saddle herself. As she led the animals toward the edge of town, a buggy pulled alongside her. In it sat Augustus Thorne, the cattle baron, who owned most of the land east of the river and coveted all the land to the west. He was a man whose bulk was matched only by his ambition, with a thick mustache and small, shrewd eyes. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice oozing a proprietary charm. A word of friendly advice. "This is a foolish endeavor. That land is worthless, nothing but rock and savages. One man's wasteland is another's laboratory." "Mr. Thorne," she replied, not breaking her stride. "I heard about your quest," he went on, ignoring her comment. a noble sentiment for your brother. But some things are best left in the past. The Comanche are a dying breed on a dying land. Let them have it. There's nothing out there for you." His eyes, however, told a different story. They held a hungry, grasping look as they scanned the western horizon, the same look a wolf gives a penned sheep. "Thank you for your concern," Eleanor said, finally stopping and turning to face him. "But I find that men who declare a piece of land worthless are usually the ones most desperate to own it." Thorne's smile tightened. "You are as stubborn as you are beautiful, Miss Vance. A dangerous combination in this part of the world. See that you don't pay the price for it." He tipped his hat, a gesture that felt more like a threat than a courtesy, and snapped the reins, his buggy rolling away in a cloud of dust. Eleanor watched him go, a sense of deep unease settling over her. The warnings from Henderson, from Sheriff Brody, from the imposing Caleb Jackson, they had all been direct born of experience. Thorne's warning felt different. It was tainted with something else, something covetous and dark. She pushed the thought aside. It didn't matter. None of them mattered. Her path was clear, laid out by a dead boy's memory and a mother's forgotten journal. She mounted her mare, her back straight, and her resolve hardened into a sharp, brittle thing. As the last sliver of civilization Fort Griffin shrank behind her, she nudged her horse forward, crossing the invisible line. She rode toward the vast, silent and forbidden lands of the Comanche, a lone figure against a blood-red sunset, completely unaware that she was not heading into an empty wilderness. She was heading toward an intersection of fates, where a botanist's hope, a scout's revenge, and a war chief's fury were destined to meet. And Caleb Jackson, from a high ridge overlooking the trail, watched her go, a grim set to his jaw. He had his own business in the Comancheria, and her foolish crusade was about to become a complication he couldn't afford. The Comancheria did not welcome Eleanor with open arms. It tested her. The sun was a relentless hammer, the wind a constant whining thief that stole the moisture from her skin and the resolve from her heart. The land itself was a deceptive maze of rolling plains that suddenly broke into jagged, sun-scorched canyons. It was a country that demanded respect, and Eleanor, for all her scientific detachment, began to feel a primal sense of awe and fear. She followed the crude map from her mother's journal, which pointed toward a series of deep canyons carved by a tributary of the Pease River. It was there, the journal claimed, in the cool, shaded crevices of the rock, that the ghost orchid bloomed. For 3 days, she rode the silence broken only by the plod of her horse and mule, the cry of a hawk, and the ceaseless wind. The loneliness was a physical weight. On the 4th day, she found the canyon. It was a deep, narrow gash in the earth, its red rock walls falling away into shadowed depths. A trickle of water, a lifeline in this arid world, ran along its floor. Hope, sharp and painful, surged through her. She made camp on the rim, a small, nervous fire, her only companion, against the encroaching dark and the chorus of coyotes. The following morning, she began her descent. It was treacherous work, leading the animals down a winding, unstable path. The air grew cooler, smelling of damp earth and stone. The silence here was different, heavier, watchful. She felt 1,000 unseen eyes on her, and for the first time the warnings of Fort Griffin echoed not as challenges, but as grim certainties. She spent the day searching the shaded ledges and damp grottos, her botany kit open on a flat rock. She found dozens of fascinating specimens, hardy ferns, resilient mosses, strange lichens, but no sign of the orchid. Disappointment was a bitter pill. As evening approached, she decided to make camp within the canyon itself, too exhausted to attempt the climb back out. She chose a small alcove, partially shielded by a rock overhang. It was then that disaster struck. As she was unsaddling her mare, a sound from above, a skittering of pebbles, drew her attention. She looked up to see the flickering yellow eyes of a mountain lion crouched on a ledge not 30 feet above her. The cat was lean and hungry, its tail twitching in predatory anticipation. Eleanor froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her rifle was still in its scabbard on the saddle. The cat let out a low, guttural snarl that vibrated through the rock. It gathered its powerful haunches, preparing to leap. Time seemed to slow, to stretch into an agonizing, silent moment. She was going to die here, not at the hands of a Comanche warrior, but in the claws of a starving predator. A gunshot exploded through the canyon, deafeningly loud. The report ricocheted off the walls, a clap of thunder in the enclosed space. The mountain lion jerked a dark hole appearing on its flank, and with a final choked snarl, it tumbled from the ledge, landing in a lifeless heap just yards from where she stood. Eleanor stood trembling, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She slowly raised her eyes from the dead cat to the ledge above. A figure was standing there, rifle in hand. It was Caleb Jackson. He descended the path with the same sure-footed grace she'd seen in the general store, his slate-gray eyes taking in the scene. He didn't look triumphant or heroic. He just looked weary, as if saving her life was just another chore in a long, tiresome day. "I told you not to come out here alone," he said, his voice flat. He nudged the dead cougar with the toe of his boot. "This land has more ways to kill you than just the two-legged kind." Eleanor finally found her voice, though it was shaky. What are you doing here?" "My business," he said evasively, ejecting the spent shell from his rifle. He looked at her camp, at the unpacked mule and the scattered botany equipment. "Looks like I'm not the only one with business in these canyons." "I'm looking for a plant," she said, feeling foolish. It sounded so trivial now, with the metallic scent of blood in the air. A plant, he repeated, a hint of disbelief in his tone. He holstered his rifle. "You risk your life. You risk starting a war with the Comanche for a plant." Anger sharp and defensive cut through her fear. "You know nothing of my reasons, Mr. Jackson. I know you're a fool, Miss Vance." He shot back, his patience clearly worn thin. "And your foolishness has now become my problem." He gestured around the canyon. "A gunshot echoes for miles in a place like this." If Kills the Enemy's war party is anywhere near, they heard that, they'll be coming to investigate. The reality of his words hit her with the force of a physical blow. The single shot that had saved her life may have just condemned them both. "We have to leave," she said, her voice urgent. "Now." "Too late for that," Caleb said, his gaze scanning the canyon rim. "They'll see our tracks leading down. Best thing to do is find a more defensible spot and wait." He looked at her meager setup in the alcove. "This isn't it." He led her deeper into the canyon, his movements economical and precise. He found a place where a rock slide had created a narrow bottleneck, a natural fortress with a clear view of the approach. As they settled in for a tense wait, the silence stretched between them, thick with her unspoken gratitude and his palpable resentment. "Why did you follow me?" she finally asked, unable to bear the quiet any longer. He was sharpening his knife on a whetstone, the rhythmic scrape of steel on stone, a strangely calming sound. He didn't look at her. "I wasn't following you. My trail just happened to overlap with yours. I'm tracking a man. Fletcher Kane. He and his gang of misfits robbed a bank in Jacksboro, killed 2 clerks. I have a history with Fletch, a personal one." The intensity in his voice was unmistakable. This was more than a posseman's duty. "Were you a lawman, Texas Ranger?" Once he said the words clipped. "Fletch was my partner. He chose gold over the badge. Left me for dead during an ambush. The men who did the ambushing, they worked for him." Eleanor stared at him, seeing past the rugged exterior to the wounded man beneath. His hunt was no less obsessive than hers. "And you think he's out here?" "I know he is. He's got a taste for lost Spanish gold. There are legends about a treasure hidden in these canyons by a Coronado expedition. Fletch is greedy enough and dumb enough to believe them. He thinks the Comanche are all penned up on the reservation. He's wrong." Suddenly, their 2 disparate quests clicked into place. 2 people, driven by the ghosts of their pasts, searching for different kinds of treasure in the same forbidden land. A plant to heal the soul, and a man to deliver justice to a betrayer. As dusk settled, painting the canyon walls in long, dark strokes, Caleb fell silent, his attention focused solely on the world outside their rock sanctuary. Eleanor found herself studying him. He was a man made of the very wilderness she was struggling to navigate. There was no artifice to him, only a hard-won competence. He was, she realized with a jolt, the first person she had met out here who didn't make her feel alone. He made her feel unsafe for entirely different reasons. But she wasn't alone. Hours passed. The moon rose a silver sliver in the inky sky. Eleanor must have drifted off, lulled by exhaustion and the rhythmic sound of Caleb's breathing. She was awoken by his hand on her arm, his touch firm and urgent. "Company," he whispered, his voice barely audible. She peered over the rocks. In the pale moonlight, she saw them. Figures on horseback moving with a silent, fluid grace that was both beautiful and terrifying. There were at least a dozen of them. They were not the wild, whooping savages of dime novels. They were warriors, their faces painted in stark patterns of black and white, their bodies lean and powerful. They carried rifles and lances, and they moved with the chilling certainty of men who owned the night. The Comanche had come to see who had dared to fire a gun in their sacred canyon. And Caleb Jackson was right. They had found them. The warriors dismounted with a silence that was more terrifying than any war cry. They flowed over the rock like water, their moccasined feet making no sound. Caleb pushed Eleanor further back into the crevice, his own body a shield between her and the approaching danger. He held his rifle at a low ready, not aiming, but prepared. It was a subtle, desperate signal: we are not looking for a fight. Their leader moved to the front. He was taller than the others, his presence commanding. Even in the dim light, Eleanor could see the intricate patterns of paint on his face and the eagle feathers woven into his long black hair. His eyes, dark and intelligent, swept over their hiding place, missing nothing. This had to be Kills the enemy. He stopped 20 feet from their position, his gaze locking with Caleb's. The silence stretched thin and taut. The air crackled with unspoken violence. Finally, the war chief spoke, his voice deep and resonant, the Comanche words flowing with a cadence that was both harsh and melodic. Caleb did not move a muscle, his expression unreadable. He asks why the white man brings his thunder into this sacred place, Caleb translated in a low whisper, his eyes never leaving the chief. He asks why you have come to steal from the earth. Tell him I am not a thief. Eleanor whispered back, her voice trembling. I am a botanist, a student of plants. I came to find one flower. Caleb's mouth tightened. He won't believe that. To them, everything here is part of the spirit of the land. Taking a single flower is no different from taking a whole herd of buffalo. He raised his voice slightly, speaking in the same Comanche tongue. His tone was respectful, measured. He spoke for a long minute, his words punctuated by gestures toward Eleanor, toward her discarded botany kit, and then toward the dead mountain lion. Kills the enemy listened, his face a stoic mask. When Caleb finished, the chief responded with a short, sharp series of words. "What did he say?" Eleanor breathed. "He says the cat is of the land. Its death was a loud one. He says your reasons are the wind, they make noise but have no substance. He says we have trespassed on the place of the spirits. And the price for that is death." A cold dread washed over Eleanor, so absolute it felt like drowning. This was it, the end of her foolish, hopeful journey. She thought of her brother Thomas, and a fresh wave of grief hit her. She had failed him. But Caleb did not panic. He began speaking again, his voice urgent, compelling. He spoke of Fletcher Kane, of the other white men, the gold seekers who were the true defilers. He gestured back the way they had come, trying to explain that a greater sacrilege was underway. Kills the enemy held up a hand, cutting him off. He spoke to his warriors, who moved forward with swift, undeniable purpose. Caleb did not resist. He slowly placed his rifle on the ground and raised his hands. Following his lead, Eleanor did the same, her body shaking uncontrollably. Resistance was suicide. They were bound swiftly and efficiently, their wrists tied with rawhide that cut into their skin. The Comanche warriors were a whirlwind of silent activity. They took their weapons, their supplies, and their horses. In less than 15 minutes, it was as if they had never been there, save for the two captives standing under the cold, indifferent moon. They were forced to walk. The journey was a brutal, humbling experience. They were herded like livestock through the darkness, up out of the canyon, and across the moonlit plains. The warriors on horseback set a punishing pace, and Eleanor's city-bred feet were soon raw and bleeding. She stumbled multiple times, and each time the rough grip of a warrior hauled her back to her feet without a word. Caleb walked beside her, his face a grim mask of concentration. "Don't show weakness," he murmured when one of the guards was out of earshot. "Don't cry. Don't complain. Just walk." His words were a lifeline. She focused on them, on the rhythmic crunch of her own broken footsteps on the dry earth. She drew on a well of inner strength she never knew she possessed, a stubbornness inherited from a long line of unyielding ancestors. She would not break. They walked through the night and into the dawn. The sun rose and the world transformed from silver and black to a blinding canvas of brown and gold. Just as Eleanor felt she could not take another step, she saw it in the distance, the Comanche camp. It was not the chaotic, squalid encampment she might have imagined. It was a large, orderly village of dozens of tipis nestled in a wide, protected valley near a winding river. Smoke rose from cook fires, the scent of roasting meat mingling with the smell of wood smoke and horses. Children played among the lodges, their laughter a surreal sound in the tense atmosphere. Their arrival caused a stir. Faces peered from teepee flaps, women, old men, children, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and hostility. They were led to the center of the village, near a large, unlit communal fire pit, and forced to their knees. The rawhide bonds were cut only to be replaced by ropes that staked them to the ground, leaving them exposed and helpless under the rising sun. Kills the enemy stood before them, joined now by an older man, whose face was a testament to 100 battles and 1,000 seasons. His wisdom was palpable, his authority absolute. This was the village chief 10 Bears' successor, a man of great influence. The war chief recounted the story of their capture, his voice carrying across the village. He spoke of the gunshot, the trespass. His words were met with murmurs of anger from the assembled crowd. This was a trial, and the verdict seemed already decided. When he finished, the old chief stepped forward. He looked down at them, his eyes ancient and weary. He spoke, his voice quieter than the war chief's, but no less powerful. Caleb translated. He asks if we have anything to say before the spirits claim our shadows. This was their only chance. Tell him. Eleanor said, her voice raspy from thirst and dust. Tell him what you told kills the enemy. About the other men, the gold hunters. Tell him they are the real threat. Caleb relayed the message. He spoke for a long time, his Comanche vocabulary seemingly endless. He described Fletcher Kane, his greed, and the legend of the Spanish gold. He tried to explain that their own purposes, while intrusive, were not malicious. He was seeking justice. She was seeking knowledge. The old chief listened patiently. When Caleb was done, a long silence fell. The chief then turned and pointed toward a teepee set apart from the others. A woman emerged, her face etched with worry. She spoke to the chief in a low, pleading tone. He listened, then looked back at Caleb and Eleanor. He issued a command. 2 warriors came forward, and to Eleanor's surprise, cut their bonds. They were hauled to their feet and pulled toward the isolated teepee. What's happening? Eleanor asked, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. I'm not sure. Caleb admitted, a rare note of uncertainty in his voice. The woman, she said her son is sick, a fever that won't break. The shaman's remedies have failed. I think they're not going to kill us. Not yet. They were thrust inside the tipi. The air was close heavy with the scent of sickness and herbal smoke. On a pile of buffalo robes lay a young boy no older than 8, his body trembling, his face flushed with fever. His breathing was shallow and ragged, a sound that transported Eleanor back 2 years to a stuffy Philadelphia bedroom and the final agonizing days of her brother's life. The boy's mother looked at her, her dark eyes filled with a desperate plea that transcended language. Then she looked at the old chief who had followed them inside. He pointed to the boy, then to Eleanor. He spoke a single word. Pohakana. Caleb translated softly. Medicine woman. Eleanor stared at the sick child, the spitting image of her own lost brother. They had seen her botany kit, her collection of plants. In their desperation, they had misinterpreted her purpose. They didn't see a scientist. They saw a healer. It was a terrible, cruel irony. She had come to this forbidden land, seeking a cure for a death long past, only to be confronted with a life hanging by a thread in the present. Her quest for a mythical flower had led her to this moment where her actual practical knowledge was being put to the ultimate test. The old chief watched her, his expression unreadable. This was not an offer of mercy. It was a challenge, a trial by fire. If she could save the boy, she might save themselves. If she failed, the price of trespassing would be paid in full. Eleanor knelt by the child's side, the weight of 2 lives, 1 gone and 1 fading, settling upon her shoulders. The interior of the teepee was a crucible. The heat from the boy's fever, the anxious presence of his mother, and the silent, judgmental gaze of the old chief created an atmosphere of unbearable pressure. Eleanor's mind raced. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. She pushed aside the haunting image of her brother Thomas and forced herself to become the scientist, the observer. She gently placed her hand on the boy's forehead. He was burning up. His breaths came in shallow, rattling pants. She listened to his chest pressing her ear to his small, trembling rib cage. The sound was horribly familiar, the congested, fluid-filled rasp of pneumonia, the same ailment that had claimed Thomas. "I need my kit," she said to Caleb, her voice steady. "And water." Clean water boiled. Caleb spoke to the chief, his tone respectful but firm. The chief gave a curt nod. A warrior was dispatched, returning minutes later with Eleanor's leather satchel and a clay pot of steaming water. The boy's mother watched her every move, her hope a fragile, painful thing to witness. Eleanor opened her kit. It wasn't a physician's bag, but it contained a botanist's tools, tinctures, dried herbs, mortar and pestle. Over the years, guided by her mother's journals, she had learned much about folk remedies and the medicinal properties of plants. She had dismissed most as superstition, but had catalogued them with scientific rigor. Now that knowledge was her only weapon, she crushed dried willow bark, a natural source of salicin, the precursor to aspirin, to combat the fever. She added a tincture of mullein, a plant known to be an expectorant to help clear the lungs. It wasn't the ghost orchid, the miracle cure of legend, but it was sound practical medicine. As she worked, she explained her actions to Caleb, who translated for the chief and the mother. She spoke of clearing the lungs, of reducing the fever of the body's need for fluids. It was a risk revealing the simple mechanics of her craft. It could shatter their illusion of her as a mystical pohakana, but it was more important to build trust through understanding. She mixed the powdered herbs with a little honey from her own stores and lukewarm water, creating a paste. The hardest part was getting the delirious boy to take it. With the mother's help, they managed to coax a small amount between his lips. Then they waited. The hours crawled by. Eleanor bathed the boy's head with cool cloths. She spoke to him in a soft, soothing voice, the English words meaningless to him, but the tone a universal comfort. Caleb sat by the teepee entrance, a silent, watchful guardian. He was her translator, her protector, her only ally in this hostile world. A strange bond was forming between them, forged in shared danger and a common unspoken understanding of obsession. Outside the tipi, the life of the village went on, but the tension was palpable. Their fate rested on the shallow breaths of a sick child. Late in the afternoon, something shifted. The boy's trembling began to subside. The fierce heat of his skin lessened. He coughed a deep, productive sound that was music to Eleanor's ears. It was a terrible, racking cough, but it was clearing his lungs. By evening, his fever had broken. He fell into a deep, natural sleep, his breathing evening out, becoming quieter and more regular. The boy's mother wept, silent tears of relief streaming down her face. She touched Eleanor's hand, her gratitude more profound than any words. The old chief entered the teepee again, his gaze falling on his sleeping grandson. A flicker of something respect, perhaps even wonder, showed in his ancient eyes. He looked at Eleanor, then at Caleb, and spoke. "He says the white woman's spirit is strong." Caleb translated a note of relief in his own voice. "He says we will not be staked in the sun, for now we are guests, not prisoners." It was a reprieve, not a pardon. They were moved to an empty teepee and given food and water. The guards were gone, but they were still watched. They were a curiosity, a danger that had temporarily proven useful. Over the next 2 days, as the boy recovered his strength, a strange routine developed. Eleanor became the camp's reluctant physician. Women brought her their children with coughs. Old men showed her their arthritic joints. She did what she could with her limited supplies, dispensing willow bark for pain and poultices for wounds. She was careful not to overstep, not to promise miracles. She was a scientist, not a sorceress. In this time, she learned from them too. The women taught her which roots could be ground into flour, which berries were safe to eat. She saw the intricate tapestry of their lives, their deep connection to the land she had viewed merely as a resource for her quest. The Comancheria was not a wilderness to them. It was a home, a provider, a sacred entity. Her perspective, once so narrow and self-centered, began to expand. Caleb, meanwhile, spoke at length with Kills the Enemy and the other warriors. His hunt for Fletcher Kane now served a dual purpose. "They've seen them," he told Eleanor one evening, as they sat outside their teepee watching the stars emerge in the pristine sky. A group of white men digging in the hills to the north, near the place they call the Painted Rocks. It's a sacred site, a place for vision quests. "Looking for the Spanish gold," Eleanor murmured. "Worse," Caleb said, his voice grim. "They're desecrating it. The warriors who saw them said they broke the Painted Rocks, dug up the ground where generations of their people have prayed. That's why Kills the Enemy's party was so on edge. It wasn't just our gunshot. They thought we were part of the same group." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. This wasn't just about trespassing. It was about sacrilege. And Augustus Thorne's threatening words came back to her. "The Comanche are a dying breed on a dying land. Let them have it." He wasn't trying to warn her away for her own safety. He was trying to clear the board. "Thorne," she said aloud, "he wants this land. He told me it was worthless, but he looked at it with such hunger. What if he's behind this? What if he hired Fletcher Kane to stir up trouble?" Caleb's slate-grey eyes hardened. "It makes a twisted kind of sense. Provoke the Comanche into a full-blown war, get them to break the treaty. The army comes in, wipes them out, or forces every last one of them onto the reservation. The land is declared safe. And Thorne is first in line to buy it for pennies on the dollar from the government. They were pawns in a much larger, more sinister game. Their personal quests had intersected with a ruthless land grab. Fletch wasn't just a bank robber hiding out. He was a mercenary, paid to commit atrocities that would ignite a firestorm. "We have to stop them," Eleanor said. Her voice filled with a new, fierce determination. It was no longer just about her brother's memory. It was about the boy she had healed, about the people who had shown her a guarded, conditional mercy. It was about justice. "We?" Caleb asked, looking at her. The woman he'd rescued in the canyon, the stubborn botanist, was gone. In her place was someone harder, clearer-eyed. "They trust you, Caleb. They respect you as a warrior, and they tolerate me. We know who Kane is. We know where he is. We can guide them. This isn't our fight, Eleanor. They made it our fight when they saved my life," she countered. "And it's your fight, because Fletcher Kane is at the heart of it. This is your chance to get him and expose the real villain, Thorne." He was silent for a long time, the firelight playing over the hard planes of his face. He was a man used to working alone, trusting no one. But her logic was undeniable. His quest for revenge and her quest for redemption had merged. The next morning they went to the old chief. With Caleb translating, Eleanor explained her theory about Thorne, about the deliberate provocation. She wasn't asking them to trust her. She was presenting a logical case scientist to Elder. Kills the Enemy was there, his arms crossed, his expression skeptical. To him, all whites were invaders. But the old chief listened intently. He had seen the slow, relentless tide of the settlers. He had seen the broken promises and the greed. The story of a rich cattle baron using outlaws to steal their land resonated with a bitter truth. Kills the enemy. We'll take a war party to the Painted Rocks, Caleb told her after the chief had spoken. He will see if your words are true. And we are going with them. He looked at her, a silent question in his eyes. Are you ready for this? Eleanor thought of the ghost orchid, still unfound. Her original quest seemed so small now, so naive. Perhaps the cure she was looking for wasn't a flower at all. Perhaps it was an action. I'm ready, she said. And for the first time, she was not afraid of the land or the people in it. She was afraid of what men like Thorn and Cain were willing to do to it. The botanist was now a warrior in her own way, riding alongside the very people she had once feared into the heart of a conflict that would decide the fate of the Comancheria. The war party moved like ghosts at dusk. Eleanor rode beside Caleb, no longer a captive, but a strange, unproven ally. The respect she had earned was fragile, yet the mother of the boy she had healed pressed a small blessing pouch into her hand, a token that meant more than any scientific award. They rode through the night, Caleb moving in perfect sync with the Comanche warriors, a man completely in his element. Fletch is arrogant, he told Eleanor, his voice low in the darkness. He'll expect an attack from the south, from the fort. He won't be expecting one from the heart of the Comancheria itself. As dawn approached, a thin plume of smoke betrayed the outlaws' camp at the Painted Rocks. Kills the enemy halted the party and dispatched 2 scouts who melted into the landscape. Eleanor's heart hammered as she waited, studying the stone-faced warriors around her. For them, this was not a fight for territory, but a defense of their very soul. The scouts returned an hour later with a grim report. 7 of them, Caleb translated. They've made camp right in the sacred circle. They're using powder charges to break the Painted Rocks, and the lookouts are lazy with drink. A cold fury settled over Kills the enemy. The desecration was worse than they had feared. He issued quiet commands for a swift, brutal attack from all sides. You stay here, Caleb told Eleanor, his tone absolute. This is going to be fast and bloody. Stay with the horses. He then disappeared into the tall grass with the others. Left with the horse guards, Eleanor strained her ears in the absolute silence. The battle began not with a volley, but a single cut-off scream, followed by a chaotic explosion of gunfire that shattered the morning. It was over in minutes, replaced by a ringing silence. After an eternity, the warriors emerged from the hills. Caleb was with them, limping from a fresh wound in his leg, but alive. It's done, he said, his face grim. Fletch is dead. I made sure of it. The finality in his voice laid a ghost to rest. Kills the enemy approached, thrusting a leather satchel at Caleb. It didn't hold gold, but papers, deeds, contracts, and a letter signed by Augustus Thorn. It was a full confession on paper promising Fletcher Cain a reward for provoking the savages into breaking the treaty and clearing the territory. They had their proof. He says the white man's words were true, Caleb translated. The real snake was in the white man's town. Kills the enemy looked at Eleanor, a new respect in his eyes. He calls you she who mends. The name struck Eleanor with profound emotion. Her quest had not been for a flower to cure the dead, but for a purpose to heal herself. That work, however, was not finished. We have to expose Thorn, she said, her voice hard. They decided to ride for Fort Griffin at once. The mother of the saved boy pointed them toward a hidden path through the Badlands, a quicker and unguarded route. Before they left, Kills the enemy led Eleanor to a shaded alcove the outlaws had missed. There, growing in a crevice, was a single perfect translucent flower, the ghost orchid. It was real. She reached out her hand, then stopped. To pick it would be a sacrilege, a violation of the very land she now respected. Its purpose was to exist here, not as a specimen in a jar. She looked at the chief, shook her head, and pulled her hand back. She had found what she was looking for, only to realize it wasn't what she needed. She turned back to her horse, mounted with a resolve as solid as the ancient rock, and rode with Caleb toward a final reckoning in Fort Griffin. The ride through the Badlands was a testament to endurance. The trail was a harsh, unforgiving track that tested their horses and their resolve. During the grueling journey, Eleanor tended to Caleb's wounded leg, and in their shared hardship, a bond of mutual respect was forged in silence and dust. By the time they saw the distant lights of Fort Griffin on the second night, they were no longer a botanist and a scout. They were partners. Thorn will have the main roads watched. Caleb stated, his voice a low rasp. We go in through the back. They left their horses in a mesquite thicket and slipped through the town's dark alleyways, the stench from the slaughterhouses masking their approach. They moved toward the single lamp burning in Sheriff Brody's office. Inside, the lawman looked utterly defeated, a man drowning in a town he couldn't control. Caleb's soft rap on the back door made him jump, hand flying to his gun. Jackson, Caleb announced. With Miss Vance. Let us in. The door creaked open, revealing Brody's astonished face. We thought you were dead. The Comanche aren't the problem, Sheriff Caleb said, stepping past him and slapping Thorn's incriminating letter onto the desk. He is. Brody read the letter, the color draining from his face. I suspected, he whispered, but Thorn owns this town. What could I do? You can do your job. Eleanor's voice cut through his excuses. Before he could answer, the front door crashed open. Augustus Thorn stood there, flanked by 2 riflemen. His usual charm replaced by naked aggression. His eyes, small and cold, fixed on them, and the letter in Brody's hand. I heard some riders came in from the Badlands, Thorn sneered. Looks like you found some trash that needs taking out, Sheriff. His men stepped forward, their intent clear. It's over, Thorn. Caleb said, his body tense. We have proof. Thorn laughed, a sound devoid of humor. That letter will be ash, and you'll be in unmarked graves before the army ever hears of it. Brody here will confirm it was a tragic accident. He stared at the sheriff, issuing a silent command. For a long moment, Brody seemed to shrink under his gaze. But then, looking at the 2 defiant people who had ridden back from the dead, something within him solidified. He carefully folded the letter, tucked it into his pocket, and drew his revolver, aiming it at Thorn's chest. No, Augustus Brody, said, his voice shaking but firm. The law is back in Fort Griffin. You're under arrest. Thorn's disbelief erupted into fury. Fool, he roared at his men. The office exploded into violence. Caleb's Colt barked once, and one of Thorn's men crumpled as he swung his rifle toward Brody. The other gunman's shot went wild, shattering the lamp and plunging the room into moonlit chaos. As Eleanor scrambled for cover, Brody and Thorn crashed against a wall, grappling for control. Caleb fired again into the shadows, and the second gunman fell. Thorn's brute strength was overwhelming the sheriff. He slammed Brody against the wall, sending the lawman's gun skittering away, and his hands closed around Brody's throat. Caleb couldn't get a clear shot. Without thinking, Eleanor grabbed a heavy book of statutes from the desk and swung it with all her might against Thorn's head. The blow made him grunt and loosen his grip just enough for Brody to break free. Caleb was on him in an instant. the cold barrel of his peacemaker pressed to Thorn's temple. The fight was over. In the aftermath, with Thorn's confession and the evidence of his letter, his empire of fear collapsed. As U.S. Marshals took control, Eleanor prepared to ride east. Caleb found her at the livery, the haunted look in his eyes gone. "You never found your miracle cure," he said. "No," she replied, gazing west. "I learned some things aren't meant to be possessed. They're just meant to be." Her quest was over. It was time to write her own story. "And you?" she asked. "I'm done hunting men," he said. "Maybe I'll do some scouting. The West is a big place. Perhaps our trails will cross again." "I'd like that. Caleb Jackson," she said, a true smile finally gracing her features. She rode east, a survivor who had looked into the heart of the wild and had not flinched. Caleb watched her go, a man free from his past, ready to face a future as wide as the Texas sky. The story of Eleanor Vance and Caleb Jackson is a reminder that the fiercest battles aren't always fought with guns, but with conviction, and that the line between civilization and savagery is often dangerously blurred. They were told to stay away, but by defying the warnings, they found not only the truth, but themselves. If their journey into the heart of the Wild West captured your imagination, please help us share more stories like this one. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a classic drama, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more tales of history, adventure, and the untamed human spirit. What do you think was the true ghost orchid Eleanor was searching for? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. Thank you for watching.